America has an obsession with OJ Simpson. And the reasons why America has an obsession with OJ Simpson have to do with this white God complex and black guilt. When it comes down to white people in the OJ Simpson trial, many believed OJ Simpson was guilty. However, they did not believe that he was guilty based on the evidence presented at trial. They believed he was guilty based on the presentation of ideas in public opinion. The media presented a picture of O.J. Simpson, and because it was presented on white media, many white people took that for fact, not understanding that much of the media presented was primarily opinion, not rooted in any sort of logic, fact, or reason. And your courts, in contrast, pretty much deal with proving a case based on logic, fact, and reason. When you go to court, a case is proved for murder based on without a reasonable doubt. And when you look at the evidence in your O.J. Simpson trial, there were pretty much too many doubts to convict Orenthal James Simpson for the murders of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. When you look at the facts of the case regarding your timeline, when you look at the glove that was back there, you look at the Bronco, and most importantly, you look at the DNA evidence and how the LAPD pretty much admitted that it pretty much mishandled that blood evidence. It pretty much proves that even if they put all this DNA here, the mishandling of that blood pretty much puts doubts in people's minds to whether or not this man committed murder. And then you have your Mark Furman, who pretty much lied on the stand and perjured himself. And there were just too many doubts in people's minds to prove whether Orenthal James Simpson committed these murders of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. And you put that with O.J. Simpson trying on the leather glove when he was wearing a rubber glove, which pretty much constricts your hand, and the leather, which pretty much expanded. You pretty much have a case that any logical person, thinking person would say, there were just too many holes in, and that there were doubts as to whether or not Orenthal James Simpson committed the murder. Unfortunately, many whites came to approach this case with emotion and not logic, and they wanted to see O.J. Simpson convicted based on the murders of this white female Nicole Brown and this Jewish white male Ron Goldman. It was all primarily based on race, not on fact. And what really shook up a lot of white people was the fact of two things. You had Orenthal James Simpson, an articulate, well-spoken African-American man who they believed betrayed them, but that was never the case. He never betrayed white people, because O.J. Simpson pretty much loved white people. He pretty much loved them enough that he actually even sacrificed himself a couple of years later in a federal trial for robbery of some sort. And what really upset white people was the O.J. Simpson had the audacity as their pet Negro to go out here and defend himself, not understanding that this was his constitutional right to go and defend himself. And the white gods, as many white people believe that they are, thought because they had an opinion of O.J. Simpson being guilty, your Orenthal James Simpson was supposed to fall on the sword and pretty much die. That's what they believed Orenthal James Simpson was supposed to do. He was supposed to be the black man. He was supposed to fall down and die, and that was supposed to be the end of it, and that would be the justice. That, this all-black jury of black women would pretty much convict him. He wouldn't defend himself in any way, shape, or form. And that upset a lot of white people. And also upset them is seeing this intelligent black man hire an intelligent black lawyer who pretty much argued this case brilliantly. When we look at Johnny Cochran's arguments and his presence, he pretty much refutes many of the ideas that white people have regarding black people. Now, they expected to see some jive time, slick talking lawyer, but Johnny Cochran pretty much presented a case based in fact, based in logic, based in reason, and that upset a lot of white people because they wanted to see a lawyer just like the one that Trayvon Martin's mother and father had, a jive time, slick talking guy who pretty much didn't know a habeas from a corpus. But Johnny Cochran came in and was eloquently spoken, well articulate, brilliantly broke down his arguments, and they could not, their brains could not process the whole idea of a black man being that intelligent. That really upset a lot of white folks to see this guy come in to court, and then to see a man like OJ Simpson actually have the backbone to actually go out and defend himself, even though this was his constitutional right as an American citizen. And a lot of white people with the God complex couldn't deal with those two concepts. It pretty much blew their mind that this black man who they put up as their boy was pretty much standing up to them, and this other intelligent black man was pretty much putting on a case that pretty much was one of the strongest legal cases against their prosecutors, who came in overconfident, arrogant, rushing in and presenting a case pretty much that was circumstantial, and many legal experts before this trial pretty much told them was going to be hard to prove. And what was really more messed up about it was they didn't have to rush to judgment. You pretty much had no limitation on the statutes. You could have pretty much waited for years to collect evidence to prove your case. But people in the LA prosecutor's office wanted to rush to judgment because they felt polarized by the media, and they wanted, and again, the prosecutors saw stars in their eyes, and they wanted to put this black brute away for murdering this attractive white female. And that's pretty much, is primarily one of the big reasons why a lot of white people have bruises on their egos regarding this OJ Simpson trial. They have bruises on their egos because when they look at this case, they see this black man having a backbone and a sack pretty much to stand up for himself in court, and he brought a brilliant black lawyer who presented his arguments to the jury and pretty much put a rock-solid case to defend himself. They have never been in a courtroom where there had been a fair fight. When it comes down to black men in the court system, white people often believe that they are right. The prosecutor often has all the money and all the resources to pretty much put any black man in jail for as long as they feel. But they were not prepared for a fair fight. They were not prepared for him to counter them at every corner. And that really, knocked white people back regarding this OJ Simpson trial. They were really shocked to see this, and they were shocked when the jury came back with a not guilty verdict. That really rocked that whole concept that a lot of white people had in their minds subconsciously, that they were God, because they believed that if they came out with an opinion, the Afro-American Negro would pretty much agree with that opinion. And here we had black people who had the backbone to say, look, we're not going along with this verdict. Not going along with this verdict, but we're not going along with this evidence and agreeing with it. We're going to argue this case based on the facts. And the facts of the matter is, when it comes down to your O.J. Simpson trial, there just was not enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that O.J. Simpson committed the murders of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. No matter what the white God says, the facts pretty much prove it wrong. And this is something that really bruises the egos of a lot of white people, that a jury that was predominantly black and a black lawyer and a black man pretty much proved that white people are not gods. White people can be wrong. And this was the second time this has been done. This is, again, like your Vietnam War. Your Vietnam War pretty much proved, again, people fought against your white supremacy, fought against this concept of this God complex, and pretty much proved this white person wrong. And this is the main reason why a lot of people are obsessed with this whole O.J. Simpson trial, in the same way they're obsessed with the Vietnam War. They're obsessed with it because it pretty much proves the mortality of white people, the fallibility of white people, and that white people are human, not the gods that they think they are. That's what upsets a lot of white people about the O.J. Simpson trial. It pretty much shatters the whole myth of their God complex and the whole idea that they are the God over the world, and that in the scheme of things, they are not God. And that pretty much was proven in this O.J. Simpson trial. And that's why they have a big problem not being able to deal with it, because you have been proven, that the facts don't measure up to your opinion of what it should be. And This is what upsets white people the most about your OJ Simpson trial. Now, on the flip side of your OJ Simpson trial, you have a concept, as I see, that arose from the OJ Simpson trial, which is black guilt. And black people in the aftermath of your OJ Simpson trial felt very guilty about passing this verdict down regarding the evidence in the OJ Simpson trial. Now, their verdict was pretty much correct because that verdict was based on the evidence. However, many African Americans feel that they have betrayed the God that they worship subconsciously. And this is one of the reasons why we see a lot of what I call self-deprecation in the African American community. Because right after your O.J. Simpson trial, we saw a lot of black people backpedaling. We saw a lot of people waffling regarding black issues. And we also saw in black media a lot of a return to the degradation and degrading images of African Americans. And I believe that's primarily due to black guilt. Black people feel guilty about presenting themselves as an equal to white people. Black people feel guilty because O.J. Simpson and Johnny Cochran represented intelligence and a presentation of articulation and equality to white people that showed that a black man could be the equal of a white man in a court system, and he could present an argument that was strong enough not only to challenge a white person, but could pretty much defeat a white person in court. And that really makes a lot of black people nervous, especially your Uncle Toms and your thugs. It makes them terrified to see the idea of a black society where black people can pretty much be the equal of white people. And a lot of black people, they have a problem with that because, as again, racism is a form of codependency. And codependent people do not like equality because equality means equal responsibility. So that's why we saw a lot of backpedaling in the African American community and an escalation of ghetto culture and thug culture because a lot of black people felt scared about that O.J. Simpson verdict because that was pretty much a powerful statement towards making progress. So we started seeing an escalation and regression out of fear. A lot of black people felt guilty about that verdict. They felt terrified about it, and a lot of them feared repercussions from white people regarding that verdict. So they began punishing themselves by doing things like escalating thug culture, and then later on further escalating things by returning to the minstrel images of the 1930s. A lot of black people are afraid of a world where there is an equal America. They want to remain in a world where there is white supremacy because they feel comfortable with that. They feel comfortable with being in the role of a victim. And this is why there is so much black guilt, because a lot of black people feel guilty about standing up for themselves, even though your Constitution pretty much says that you have a right to defend yourself in court. You are innocent until proven guilty, and you have a right to a speedy trial. And O.J. Simpson pretty much took advantage of all of those rights guaranteed to him under the United States Constitution. He understood the Constitution, and that's what's got a lot of black people upset, because we've never really had that many black people actually stand up for themselves. And it was really interesting is this was supposed to be considered one of the most progressive periods, and here we have a man using his tools to progress himself, and it really was, and he was actually, derided for it, and that's why, again, we see all this regression when it comes down to culture, when it comes down to our society, black society. Whenever we see some progression, we see black people regressing out of guilt, and that was also seen, in 2008 with your Barack Obama. When he became president, we see, again, more regression from your African Americans in the community. We get the black president, but instead of the black people coming together to start building, not around him, but to start building some momentum, instead we see a regression where we see black people turning their communities into ghettos. And I also saw this in 2001 when Halle Berry won the Oscar. We saw another regression with black culture when it came down to film and media. Even though that film was degrading, it was part of that whole O.J. Simpson thing. It pretty much shows that every time black people try to make a step in progress, they start feeling black guilt, and they start regressing, and they start going back to promoting degrading images of themselves so that they believe they can make white people feel comfortable about black people. They don't want to step too far ahead because a lot of black people don't want to be able to say that that they have to be responsible in an equal society. A lot of people like being the victim. So this is why they will continue to regress in ways. They will just sit there because they're afraid of an equal society. Because in an equal society, you cannot have a white man to point a finger at. And in an equal society, a white man can't point his finger at a black man. And that, again, that concept scares a lot of people. It makes people feel extremely uncomfortable. When you have an equal society where there's equal rights, there's also equal responsibility. So there's nobody you can point a finger at as the cause of your problems. And when they look at that OJ Simpson trial, it really shatters that whole God complex that a lot of white people have, and it shatters that whole victim concept that many black people have. And that's why they have an obsession with it, because what happens is they can't reconcile the idea that for one moment in American history, people actually looked at a case based on fact, based on evidence, and used logic and reason to pretty much, come to a conclusion regarding some evidence. And it pretty much showed that the concept of the U.S. Constitution is actually workable, and that the concepts of that the American society could actually be executed. And that the big problem when it comes down to America, when it comes down to race, is that we the people pretty much are continuing to maintain this codependent cycle that prevents the country from growing. And instead of, reconciling with this verdict in the OJ Simpson trial, people became polarized and became separated, and black people began regressing, and white people began, regressing, because they could not stand to move ahead. And I see this cycle, of regression every time there's a minute that we have, a milestone like that. Black people start backpedaling and start going back to being minstrels, and white people go back to their white supremacist position. And that all goes into this whole mental health and codependency theory I have come up with over the years, because when I look at, again, racism, it looks like a form of codependency. And the minute people start making progress towards healing, we get a regression where we go back to this vicious cycle of victim and abuser. And that's what I'm seeing happening right now. And I think it may get a little worse with the departure of Barack Obama. That's why the country is in chaos right now, because they can't reconcile the idea of this black man having 2 terms in office. And we see these white people who are becoming more and more dysfunctional, and showing that they can't process the idea of a world where everything is actually equal. That's why you see your Donald Trump and your Hillary Clinton as your candidates, because they just can't process the idea. Americans can't process the idea that a black man actually led their country for 8 years. And they can't handle the idea, again, back in the 90s, that OJ Simpson actually proved that you could get a fair trial if you had the right resources and you understood the law. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.